So far in our programs, you haven't been able to save any of the operations that you've done. So that might be something that's really nice. Maybe after you did the GPA calculator or something like that, it would be really nice to actually save the output of that and then read it later. Those kinds of things are possible with what's called file I/O or just I/O. So maybe you've got a database that you want to save that in, or you want to write it out to the actual hard disk on your computer and access it just with a file. So those are really handy. Databases are more of an advanced topic. There's a lot more involved that in interacting with a database. You usually need modules, and you have to set up a third-party database like Postgres or MySQL or something like that. And that's not something we're going to get into in this stage. But files are really easy, and Python makes it almost trivial. So I'm going to give an example of how to write to a file. So in Python, they've got a built-in function called open, and then you specify a file name. And so I'm just going to say file.txt just for simplicity. And then I specify a mode that I want to open it in. And so I'm going to say I want it to be A, which is append. And then I'm just going to close that off. And then I'm going to name what this file object is going to be. And if I just do this and I return it, the open function is going to return a file object. So that's valid right there. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put this in what's called a with block. So I'm going to specify with right here, and then the name of the file object is actually going to go here at the end, and I'm just going to call it F. That's what I always do. I always just call my file objects F. And we talked about scope, and so since we're actually declaring this variable inside of the scope, even though it looks like it's part of the declaration, the scope of F is only valid inside of here. If I try to access it, out here, it's not going to be defined. So this file object is going to allow us to interact with the file that we want to either write to or read from. And so since I specified A, I'm going to be writing to this file. I could specify R to read from it. There's also things like A plus that allows you to read and write, or if I did R plus. But I'm just going to write in append mode, which means it's only going to append to the end of the file. It's not going to write a new file. And go ahead and read the documentation. I've got a link in the lesson if you want to get a lot more information on these modes. But then I can use this file object that they give me, and I can do operations on it. If I were reading, I could do read, and it would return all the contents of the file, and I can just store them in this contents array. But again, contents is only valid inside of this block. So if I want to access it outside of the block, I have to do something like this. So that's something to keep in mind. Anything that you do that's defined inside of this block, you're going to want to make sure that it's available outside of the block. And Python's a little tricky with scope, and I didn't go into this when we talked about the scope lesson. But technically, contents would be available outside of the block, but you just don't want to trust that. It's much better just to declare it outside of the block and always be sure. So other languages would yell at you. They would not allow that to be possible, but Python's a little bit weird that way. It's one of the things that I don't love about Python, which there aren't a lot of those. So anyway, so if we were going to read, we could do the whole thing, all the contents of the file into one string, or we could just read one line from the file. Or we could get all of the lines. Let's see here. We could get all of the lines and actually do this in a for loop, for line in f.readlines. And so it's going to return all of the lines of the file, and it's going to put them in an array, and then we're going to iterate over that array, and then we could print out all the lines here. And that's if I were in the read mode. But since we're not in the read mode, we're going to write to the file. So I'm going to say f.write, and it's going to write all of the contents that I give it as a string to the file. So if I put something here, contents equals this is really easy. And what isn't it like? So then I can just write the contents here. And let's try running this program. What is it called? So Python files. So I didn't print anything out, so I don't know if it worked, but I can try seeing what's in it. And this cat operation is going to just print out the contents of a file. So I should have this file called file.txt, and it says this is really easy. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. What if I had an array though, and I've got 2 strings in it? And if I try to do this write function, what is that going to do? It's going to be like, whoa, I don't know how to print an array. I only know how to print a string. And so this write function requires that you have a string. So you have this other function called writelines. And now that works. So now if I try to do cat the file, it's going to print it all out. But that's not, I mean, we don't really want it to look like that, right? I mean, it's all jammed onto one line. So what do? So it might be better to just do it in a loop. So for line in contents, and then we go back to just writing, and then we print out the line. Oops. So there we go. Oh, and that still did it wrong. So we actually want to write with a new line character. And we talked about that before. This \n is not a character that you actually ever really see. You never see it printed out \n, but the way that you actually see it happen is that it prints out a new line. So now when we run it, it's on 2 lines. And since we're in append mode, it's going really funny. So if I go back to, let's just change this to write mode, it's going to write a new file every time. There we go. So now it's on 2 lines because I've got this new line character right here. That was weird. So it's just, you've got a lot of power in what you can do with writing to these files. So you've got the different modes to read, to write, to append. You can write a bunch of lines in an array. We could have put new lines in the actual strings. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things you can do. This with block is also really important to remember. The reason why you want to use the with block, and I didn't mention this earlier, is whenever you open a file, you are allocating a resource. The operating system is allocating a resource to your program, and you want to handle that resource responsibly. And so when you get one of these, let's say that we were doing it without the with block, and so I say f equals open, and we do it like this. So this would be the same thing as what we did before, but, and so you can see that it does the exact same thing. But what we didn't do is we didn't close our file object. So we opened it, but we never closed it again. So we have to f.close. And so whenever you allocate a resource, whether it's, and this happens a lot of times with databases, whenever you open a connection to a database, you've got to remember to close that connection. And so these things that are closable, if you can call it that, so these things that you need to close are what's called closable resources, you can use a with block for that. And so that's why we have that. So we can use with, and then as f, and then we can put all of that inside of the block, and then when the block exits, it does this f.close automatically. So isn't that handy? So now you don't ever have to remember to close your resource as long as you put it in a with block. So writing to files is super easy. It's in other languages it's kind of hard. I wouldn't say hard, but it's just a lot more involved than in Python. So it's something that you should really take advantage of because it makes it really easy in Python.